The phone's camera trembled in my hands as I stared at the image on the screen. Dark purple bruises wrapped around my ribs like twisted ribbons, and the red welts across my back told a story I'd been trained never to speak. But sometimes silence becomes its own kind of prison, and I was tired of being locked away. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Catherine Morgan, and for 3 years I believed my stepfather David was just strict. That's what Mom called it when he'd make me stand in the corner for hours, or when his voice would shake the windows during his lectures about respect and obedience. Even when his discipline escalated to his leather belt, Mom would stroke my hair afterward and whisper that he only wanted what was best for me. It wasn't until I found Mrs. Henderson's psychology textbook in the school library, fallen behind a shelf and forgotten, that words like abuse and trauma bonding entered my vocabulary. The chapter on family violence felt like reading my own diary, written by a stranger who somehow knew my life, but this story really begins 6 months ago, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other in our cramped apartment on Maple Street. The coffee maker was gurgling in the kitchen, Mom was rushing around getting ready for her job at the insurance office, and David sat at our small dining table, reading the newspaper with that intense focus he brought to everything. His construction uniform was laid out perfectly on the back of his chair, work boots polished to a shine that could blind you. I was 17, a senior at Riverside High, and I'd learned to move through our apartment like a ghost. Keep quiet. Stay invisible, don't give David any reason to notice you. That morning, I thought I'd mastered the art of being overlooked. I was wrong. My backpack caught the edge of David's coffee mug as I passed behind his chair. The ceramic hit the linoleum floor with a sound like a gunshot, sending dark liquid spreading across the freshly mopped tiles. Time seemed to freeze as David slowly turned around, his gray eyes meeting mine with that look I'd learned to fear. Catherine Marie Morgan, he said, using my full name like a weapon. What did I tell you about being careless? I'm sorry, David. It was an accident. My voice came out smaller than I intended, the words of a child instead of someone 6 months away from 18. Accidents happen when people don't pay attention. He stood up, his 6'3" frame towering over me. And what happens when people don't pay attention? The ritual response fell from my lips automatically. They need to learn. Mom appeared in the doorway, car keys jangling in her hand. David, she didn't mean to. I'm already running late, Susan. His voice cut through her words like ice. How many times have we discussed undermining my authority in this house? I watched Mom's shoulders slump, the fight draining out of her as quickly as it had sparked. In 3 years of marriage, David had perfected the art of making her second guess every maternal instinct. He called it helping her be a better parent. She called it love. You're right, Mom said, avoiding my eyes. Catherine, clean this up and then go to your room. David will handle this when he gets home from work. The dread settled in my stomach like a stone. David's handling things had evolved over the years. It started with lectures that could last hours, my legs aching from standing perfectly still while he explained my failures in excruciating detail. Then came the punishments, writing lines until my hand cramped, missing meals, losing privileges one by one until my world shrank to the size of my bedroom. The belt was a recent addition, introduced 6 months ago after I'd questioned why my curfew was 2 hours earlier than my friends. David had explained patiently, almost kindly, that some lessons needed to be felt to be learned. Mom had held me afterward, her own hands shaking as she applied ice to the welts, whispering that he'd had a hard childhood and sometimes didn't know his own strength. That Tuesday, I cleaned the coffee and spilled tears in equal measure, then spent the school day in a fog of anxiety. My best friend Maya noticed during lunch, the way she always did. You're doing that thing again, she said, picking at her sandwich. Maya Chen had been my anchor since middle school, the kind of friend who could read your moods from across a crowded hallway. What thing? That 1,000-yard stare. Like you're somewhere else entirely. She studied my face with the intensity she usually reserved for her AP biology assignments. What happened this morning? I wanted to tell her. The words sat on my tongue, desperate to break free after years of careful containment. But David's voice echoed in my head, family business stays in the family, Catherine. People wouldn't understand our way of doing things. Nothing, I said instead. Just tired. Maya didn't believe me, but she'd learned not to push. Over the years, she'd watched me make excuses for missed plans, explain away the occasional bruise, and deflect questions about my home life with practiced ease. I think part of her suspected something was wrong, but suspecting and knowing are 2 different countries, and I'd built a wall between them. The afternoon dragged like a funeral march. In English class, we discussed the glass menagerie, and when Mrs. Foster asked about family dynamics in dysfunctional households, I found myself thinking about Laura Wingfield's Fragile World, controlled and shaped by others' expectations. During chemistry, I mixed solutions with hands that wouldn't stop trembling, earning concerned looks from my lab partner. By the time the final bell rang, my nerves were stretched so tight I could hear them humming. I walked home slowly, taking the long route through downtown, past the bookstore where I'd spent countless hours hiding between the shelves, past the coffee shop where Maya and I used to study before my privileges got restricted. Our apartment building came into view too. Soon. 3 stories of faded brick, with narrow hallways that smelled like cooking oil and other people's secrets. I climbed to the second floor on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, fishing my key from my backpack with fingers that kept slipping on the metal. Inside, the apartment felt different. Mom's car wasn't in the parking lot, which meant she was working late again. David's truck was there though, parked in its usual spot with military precision. The silence felt heavy, pregnant with the promise of what was coming. I found him in the living room, still in his work clothes, but with his boots off. He'd changed into the canvas belt he kept for special occasions, the one that whistled when it cut through air. On the coffee table sat a small digital camera, the kind Mom used for her scrapbooking hobby. "Sit down, Catherine." I perched on the edge of the couch, my hands folded in my lap the way he'd taught me. David picked up the camera, turning it over in his large hands like he was examining a foreign object. "I've been thinking about this morning," he said conversationally. "About patterns of behavior and the importance of documentation." My throat felt dry. "I don't understand. Your mother and I have been discussing your attitude lately. The eye rolling when I speak, the way you slam doors, the general disrespect that seems to be growing like a cancer in this household." His voice remained calm, almost gentle. "I think it's time we started keeping better records." He held up the camera. "Evidence of discipline administered. Evidence of lessons learned. Something to review later, to see if our methods are working." The blood drained from my face. "David, please, stand up." I obeyed automatically, my body moving before my mind could process the command. This was new territory, uncharted and terrifying. In 3 years, David had never suggested documenting his punishments. The privacy of our family's dysfunction had always been sacred to him. "Turn around." I turned, facing the wall where Mom's cross-stitch samplers hung in neat rows. "Home is where the heart is. Bless this house." Words that felt like mockery now. The first strike came without warning, the belt connecting with my lower back through my school uniform. The camera clicked behind me. "This is what defiance looks like," David's voice narrated clinically. "This is what happens when respect isn't shown." The second strike hit higher, across my shoulder blades. Click. Each mark is a lesson. Each lesson is a gift. By the 5th strike, I was crying too hard to hear his words. By the 10th, I was gripping the wall to keep from falling. The camera kept clicking, documenting each moment of my breakdown with mechanical indifference. When it was over, David handed me the camera. "Delete them," he said simply. I stared at the device in my trembling hands, my vision blurred by tears. The display showed a series of images: my back, my shoulders, my face contorted in pain. Evidence of what had just happened, proof that this wasn't normal family discipline. "Delete them, Catherine." My finger hovered over the delete button. This was the moment, I realized later. The crossroads where my life could have continued down its well-worn path of silence and compliance, or branched into something unknown and dangerous. Instead of pressing delete, I pressed save. "They're gone," I lied, handing the camera back to him. David nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now go clean yourself up. Your mother will be home soon, and she doesn't need to see you upset." I stumbled to my bedroom, closing the door with careful quiet. In my small attached bathroom, I lifted my shirt and twisted to see my back in the mirror. The welts were already darkening, cross-hatching my pale skin like a roadmap of pain. I thought about Mrs. Henderson's psychology textbook, about the chapter on documentation and evidence. About how abusers often escalated their behavior, pushing boundaries until their victims couldn't recognize the line between discipline and violence. That night, I lay awake listening to David and Mom's muffled conversation through the thin walls. I could hear her asking about my attitude at dinner, her voice tinged with the worry of a mother who'd learned to trust her husband's judgment over her own instincts. "She's testing boundaries," David explained patiently. "It's normal for teenagers. But we can't let it continue. Consistency is key, Susan. If we don't show her consequences now, she'll never learn to respect authority." But she seemed so quiet tonight. Almost scared. "That's growth. That's learning. Don't mistake compliance for fear, sweetheart. Catherine knows we love her, but she also knows there are rules in this house." I pressed my face into my pillow, tasting salt and shame. Through my window, I could see the lights of other apartments. Other families living their lives behind glowing rectangles. I wondered if any of them were like mine, if any of them hid their truths behind careful words and strategic silence. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. My back ached with every movement, and my uniform shirt stuck to the still tender welts. In the bathroom mirror, I looked like a ghost of myself, pale skin, dark circles under my eyes, and something new in my expression that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't until I was getting dressed that I remembered the camera Mom kept it in her desk drawer in the living room, along with her scrapbooking supplies and old photo albums. David had left early for work, and Mom was in the shower, so I had maybe 10 minutes before she emerged. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. My hands shook as I pulled open the drawer, digging through packets of stickers and colored pens until I found the small silver camera. I turned it on, navigating to the photo gallery with fingers that felt too thick for the tiny buttons. There they were. David had lied about making me delete them, or maybe he'd forgotten to check. 12 photos in total, each one a stark documentation of the previous evening's lesson. The images were clinical, almost artistic in their composition. David had a photographer's eye for capturing pain, but as I scrolled through them, something shifted in my perspective. These weren't just pictures of my punishment. They were evidence. Proof of something that had been happening in the shadows, finally dragged into the light. I thought about Maya's older sister Jessica, who worked at the district attorney's office downtown. I thought about Mrs. Peterson, my guidance counselor, who'd given me her business card 3 times over the past year with meaningful looks I'd pretended not to understand. I thought about all the adults who'd tried to reach me through my carefully constructed walls. The shower turned off upstairs. Mom would be down in 5 minutes, maybe less. I connected the camera to our old computer, the one David used for work emails and Mom used for her online coupon hunting. The files transferred slowly, each image loading line by line like a revelation in slow motion. I saved them to a folder buried deep in the computer's directory, then copied them to an old flash drive I found in Mom's desk. By the time Mom appeared in the kitchen, I was sitting at the table eating cereal, the camera back in its drawer and my secret burning like a coal in my chest. "How are you feeling this morning, honey?" Mom asked, pouring her coffee with the careful movements of someone trying not to wake sleeping demons. "Fine," I said, the same lie I'd been telling for years, but something was different now. I had evidence. I had proof. For the first time in 3 years, I had something more powerful than David's carefully constructed narrative about family discipline and loving correction. I had the truth. At school that day, I moved through my classes in a strange fog of clarity. Every lesson felt different when viewed through the lens of my new knowledge. In history class, we discussed civil rights movements, and I found myself thinking about the power of documentation, the way photographs had changed public perception of injustice. In English, we analyzed character motivations in Hamlet, and I understood Hamlet's paralysis in a way that felt too personal, too real. Maya found me at lunch, settling across from me with her usual careful observation. "You look different today," she said, unwrapping her sandwich. "Not bad different. Just different." "Different how?" "Like you made a decision about something." She studied my face with the intensity of a scientist examining a new species. "Did something happen?" I almost told her then. The words sat on my tongue, heavy and urgent. But David's training ran deep, and his voice whispered warnings about family loyalty, about the consequences of betrayal. "Maybe," I said instead. "Maybe I'm just tired of being tired." Maya nodded like this made perfect sense to her, though I could see questions dancing behind her dark eyes. We ate in comfortable silence, and for the first time in months, I actually tasted my food. The rest of the day passed in a blur of ordinary moments made extraordinary by the secret burning in my chest. I had taken the first step into unknown territory, and there was no going back. That evening, David was unusually pleasant at dinner. He asked about my classes, complimented Mom on her cooking, and even smiled at one of my careful responses to his questions. To anyone watching, we looked like a normal family sharing a normal meal, but I could feel the weight of the flash drive in my pocket, and I knew that appearances could lie as easily as words. The evidence was safe, hidden where only I could find it, waiting for the moment when I would be brave enough to let it speak. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar sounds of our apartment settling into sleep, I thought about crossroads and choices. About the difference between surviving and living. I had spent 3 years learning to be invisible, to shape myself into whatever David needed me to be to keep the peace. But invisibility, I was beginning to understand, was just another kind of prison. The photos on my flash drive were more than evidence. They were a key, and keys, I remembered from some long ago fairy tale, were meant to unlock doors. The flash drive felt like a loaded weapon in my jacket pocket as I walked through the halls of Riverside High the next morning. Every step seemed to echo with possibility and danger in equal measure. I'd crossed a line by keeping those photos, and there was no pretending otherwise. During first period chemistry, Mr. Rodriguez was explaining molecular bonds when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. David wants to talk to you after school. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. My stomach dropped. Had he discovered the photos were still on the camera? Had he somehow figured out what I'd done? I spent the rest of class period trying to look normal while my heart hammered against my ribs like a caged bird. At lunch, Maya immediately noticed my distress. She had this uncanny ability to read my moods, probably from years of friendship with someone who'd learned to hide everything. Okay, spill, she said, sliding her tray across from mine. You look like you're about to throw up, and you've been checking your phone every 30 seconds. I glanced around the cafeteria, making sure no one was listening. The usual chaos of teenage conversations provided good cover, but I still lowered my voice. Maya, hypothetically, if someone had evidence that something bad was happening to them, but using that evidence might make things worse, what would you do? Maya's dark eyes sharpened with concern. Catherine, what kind of evidence? What kind of bad things? Before I could answer, Jessica Chen appeared beside our table. Maya's older sister was 23, fresh out of law school, and worked as a paralegal at the district attorney's office downtown. She usually avoided the high school crowd, but today she'd come to have lunch with Maya. Sorry to interrupt, Jessica said, setting down her visitor's badge. Maya, I need to borrow your chemistry notes for tonight. I'm helping Mom understand your homework. She paused, studying my face with the same intensity as her sister. Catherine, right? You look familiar. Do I know you from somewhere? Maya kicked me under the table. Jess, Catherine was just asking a hypothetical question about evidence and legal stuff. You know, for her government class. Jessica's expression shifted into professional mode. She slid into the seat beside Maya, lowering her voice. What kind of hypothetical situation? I felt trapped between wanting help and fearing the consequences. Just, if someone had proof that an adult was hurting them, but that adult was really good at making everyone think they were the victim, what would happen if they reported it? How good is the proof? Jessica asked carefully. Photographs. Video maybe. Documentation of injuries. Jessica leaned forward, her lawyer instincts fully engaged. Catherine, this doesn't sound hypothetical. Are you safe at home? The direct question hung in the air like a challenge. I'd spent 3 years deflecting similar inquiries from teachers, counselors, and friends. But something about Jessica's professional demeanor, combined with the weight of the flash drive in my pocket, made the truth feel possible. I don't know, I whispered. I used to think I was. But now I'm realizing that maybe what I thought was normal isn't actually normal at all. Maya grabbed my hand across the table. Catherine, what are you talking about? What's been happening? For the next 20 minutes, I told them everything. About David's escalating punishments, about Mom's willingness to look the other way, about the belt and the photographs and the growing fear that had become the background music of my life. The words came in a rush, 3 years of silence breaking like a dam. When I finished, Maya was crying. Jessica was taking notes on her phone, her professional mask firmly in place. Catherine, Jessica said carefully, what you're describing is abuse. Physical abuse, psychological abuse, and what sounds like coercive control of your mother as well. But he says it's discipline. He says he loves me, that he's trying to help me become a better person. Abusers always have justifications, Jessica replied. Love doesn't leave bruises. Love doesn't require documentation for later review. Love doesn't make you afraid to exist in your own home. Maya squeezed my hand tighter. Why didn't you tell me? All these years, I knew something was wrong, but you always said everything was fine. Because I thought it was fine. Or at least, I thought it was normal for me. David is really good at making everything seem logical, like each punishment is just the natural consequence of my behavior. I pulled out my phone and showed them the text from Mom. Like this. He wants to talk to me after school, and Mom is already asking me not to make it harder. Jessica read the message, her jaw tightening. Do you have somewhere safe you can go tonight? I can't just not go home. That would make everything worse. Catherine, listen to me. Jessica's voice carried the authority of someone who'd seen too many similar cases. Abusers escalate. The fact that he started documenting his violence is a major red flag. You need to think about your safety. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Students began clearing their tables, the normal rhythm of the school day continuing around our crisis. I have to go, I said, standing up. I have trigonometry, and if I'm late, David will hear about it. Wait. Jessica grabbed my arm gently. Do you have those photos you mentioned? I nodded, touching my jacket pocket. Don't let him know you have them. And Catherine? If you need help, call me. Maya has my number. She handed me a business card. Day or night? I mean it. The afternoon dragged like torture. In trigonometry, I stared at sine and cosine waves while wondering if my life was about to become much more complicated. During AP English, we discussed the concept of unreliable narrators, and I couldn't help wondering if I'd been the unreliable narrator of my own life, convincing myself that abuse was love, that fear was respect. Mrs. Peterson, my guidance counselor, stopped me in the hallway between classes. She was a small woman with kind eyes who'd been trying to connect with me for years. Catherine, do you have a minute? We ducked into her office, a cramped space filled with college brochures and motivational posters. She closed the door and settled behind her desk. I've been thinking about our conversation last month, about your college applications. You mentioned that your stepfather was very involved in the decision-making process. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. He just wants what's best for me. I'm sure he does. But I've noticed some patterns in your academic performance that concern me. She pulled out a folder with my name on it. Your grades were excellent until about 2 years ago. Since then, you've been increasingly anxious during tests, you've missed several days of school, and your teachers report that you seem distracted. I'm just stressed about college. Mrs. Peterson studied me with the same intensity as the Chin sisters. Catherine, I've been a counselor for 15 years. I've learned to recognize when students are dealing with difficult situations at home. She leaned forward. Is there anything you want to talk about? The offer hung in the air. Another adult reaching out, another opportunity to speak the truth I'd been carrying alone. But David's voice echoed in my head, people wouldn't understand. Our family dynamics. They'd twist everything, make it sound worse than it is. Everything's fine, I said automatically. Mrs. Peterson nodded, but she made a note in my file. Well, my door is always open. And Catherine? Remember that you'll be 18 soon. That comes with certain freedoms that you might not have now. The dismissal bell rang at 3:15, and I walked toward the front entrance with the slow deliberation of someone approaching an execution. Maya caught up with me at my locker. I called Jessica, she said quietly. She's going to research your options. But Catherine, promise me you'll be careful tonight. If things get bad, really bad, you call us. Okay? I promised, though I wasn't sure what really bad meant anymore. Everything had been bad for so long that I'd lost perspective on where normal ended and crisis began. The walk home felt different. This time, instead of the usual dread, I felt a strange combination of fear and clarity. The photos on my flash drive had changed something fundamental. I was no longer just David's victim, I was someone gathering evidence, someone building a case. Mom's car was in the parking lot when I arrived, which meant she'd left work early. That never happened unless David had specifically requested it. The apartment felt charged with tension when I walked in, like the air before a thunderstorm. They were both in the living room. David sat in his usual chair, still wearing his work clothes. Mom perched on the edge of the couch, her hands twisting in her lap. The camera sat on the coffee table between them like an accusation. Catherine, David said without looking up. Sit down. I sat across from him, my backpack still on my shoulders. The flash drive felt like it was burning through my jacket pocket. Your mother and I have been talking about last night, David began. About the importance of consistency and discipline, and about making sure you understand why these lessons are necessary. Mom avoided my eyes. We just want you to know that we love you, honey. Everything we do is because we care about your future. Susan, David said quietly, and Mom fell silent. Catherine, I've been reviewing the documentation from yesterday, and I think there might be some value in keeping those images after all. My blood turned to ice. What do you mean? I mean that sometimes we need reminders of where we've been to appreciate where we're going. He picked up the camera, turning it over in his hands. I think it might be helpful for you to see those photos again, to really understand what defiance looks like, what it costs. He turned on the camera and began scrolling through the images. I watched his face change as he navigated through the photo gallery, his expression shifting from calm confidence to confusion to something darker. Catherine, his voice was deadly quiet. Where are the photos from last night? I forced my voice to remain steady. You told me to delete them. I deleted them. These aren't deleted. These are saved to the camera's memory card. His eyes met mine, and I saw suspicion burning there. Did you save them somewhere else first? The room felt like it was shrinking. Mom looked between us, clearly not understanding what was happening but sensing the danger. I don't know how cameras work, I said. I just pressed the buttons you told me to press. David stood up slowly. At his full height, he seemed to fill the entire room. Catherine, I'm going to ask you one more time. Did you copy those photos before you deleted them? This was the moment. The crossroads where I could continue the lie and hope he believed me, or where I could stand up for the truth that was burning in my pocket. 3 years of training told me to give him what he wanted, to apologize and submit and make the problem go away. Instead, I thought about Jessica's words, "Love doesn't leave bruises." "Yes," I said quietly. I copied them. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom made a small sound somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. David's face went through several expressions before settling into something cold and calculating. "I see." He sat back down, his movements deliberate and controlled. "And what exactly did you plan to do with these copies?" "I don't know yet." "You don't know." He repeated my words like he was tasting them. "Catherine, do you understand what you've done? Do you understand the position you've put this family in?" "I understand that what happened last night wasn't discipline. It was abuse." Mom stood up abruptly. "Catherine, how can you say that? David loves you. Everything he does is to help you become a better person." "No, Mom. Everything he does is to control us. Both of us." I turned to look at her directly. "When was the last time you made a decision without asking his permission? When was the last time you saw your friends, or chose what to watch on TV, or even picked what to make for dinner without checking with him first?" "That's different," Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. "That's being considerate. That's how marriages work. That's how prison works," I replied. David laughed, a sound without humor. "You think you understand the world, Catherine? You think you know how families function, how respect works, how authority structures maintain order?" He leaned forward. "You're 17 years old. You have no experience, no perspective, and no understanding of the complexities of adult relationships. I understand that adults don't beat children with belts and take pictures of the damage." The words hung in the air like a challenge. David's mask slipped completely for just a moment, and I saw the real person underneath, not a stern but loving stepfather, but someone who enjoyed having power over others, someone who fed on control and fear. "You're going to give me those copies," he said quietly. "And then we're going to have a much longer conversation about respect and consequences." "No." The word came out stronger than I felt. "I'm not giving you anything." David stood up again. "Susan, go to your room." "This is my daughter," Mom protested weakly. "I should be here." "Susan, go to your room. Now." Mom looked at me with something that might have been apology, then left without another word. I heard her bedroom door close upstairs, and I was alone with David for the first time since I'd gained the power to fight back. "You have no idea what you're playing with," David said, moving closer. "You think those photos are some kind of weapon? You think anyone will believe you over me? I'm a respected member of this community. I coach Little League. I volunteer at the church. I've been married to your mother for 3 years without a single complaint from either of you. Because you trained us not to complain. I taught you respect." He was standing directly in front of me now, close enough that I could smell his aftershave and see the small scar on his chin from some long ago accident. "And apparently, you need more lessons. Touch me and I'll scream loud enough for the whole building to hear." David smiled, but it was the expression of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "Go ahead and scream, Catherine. I'll tell everyone you had another one of your episodes. Just like your father had before his accident." The reference to my biological father hit like a physical blow. Dad had died when I was 12, in a car crash that everyone said was caused by his erratic behavior in the weeks before his death. David had been nothing but supportive during Mom's grief, stepping into our lives like a savior. "What do you know about my father's accident?" "I know that mental illness runs in families. I know that teenage girls under stress can have psychotic breaks. I know that sometimes people need to be hospitalized for their own safety." His voice was calm, conversational. "I know that if you keep acting out, making wild accusations, people will start to wonder if you've inherited your father's instability." The threat was clear. David wasn't just talking about discrediting my claims of abuse, he was talking about having me committed, declared mentally incompetent, removed from the equation entirely. But instead of feeling more afraid, I felt something unexpected: anger. Pure, clean anger that burned away the fog of confusion and fear I'd been living in for 3 years. "You're right about one thing," I said, standing up and stepping back from him. "Mental illness does run in families. But I think you've got the wrong family member." David's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've been doing some research. About patterns of behavior, about what normal family discipline actually looks like, about the difference between love and control." I pulled out my phone, not to show him anything, but to let him know I had resources he couldn't control. "I've been learning a lot about people who hurt the people they claim to love. You don't know anything. I know that healthy parents don't take photographs of their children's injuries. I know that love doesn't require documentation. I know that discipline doesn't escalate the way yours has. I moved toward the door, keeping my distance from him. And I know that I'm not crazy. No matter how many times you try to convince me I am. David moved to block my path to the door. You're not leaving until we resolve this. Yes, I am. I pulled out my phone and started dialing. I'm calling the police. Stop. His voice cracked like a whip. You call them, and you'll destroy this family. Your mother will lose her home, her husband, her stability. Is that what you want? To ruin the only security she's had since your father died. My finger hesitated over the call button. This was his genius, I realized. He'd made himself so central to our lives, so essential to our survival, that fighting him meant destroying everything else too. You're bluffing, he continued. You won't call because you know what it will cost. You know that even if anyone believed you, the damage would be irreversible. Your mother would never forgive you. He was probably right about Mom. 3 years of David's influence had taught her to see him as her rescuer, her provider, her protection against a world that had already taken one husband from her. Choosing me over him would mean admitting that she'd been wrong, that she'd allowed her daughter to be hurt in the name of love, but I thought about Jessica's business card in my pocket, about Maya's fierce loyalty, about Mrs. Peterson's offer of help. I thought about the flash drive with its damning evidence, and about the choice between survival and freedom. Maybe, I said. But I'd rather risk everything than live in fear for the rest of my life. I pressed the call button. David lunged forward, grabbing for my phone, but I was faster. I dodged around the coffee table and ran for the door, my phone pressed to my ear as it rang. 911, what's your emergency? I need help, I said, fumbling with the deadbolt. I'm at 847 Maple Street, apartment 2B. My stepfather is trying to stop me from reporting abuse, and I'm afraid he's going to hurt me. Behind me, I heard David cursing, then the sound of furniture being overturned. I got the door open just as heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs from above. Catherine? Mom's voice called from the stairwell. What's happening? What's all the noise? I ran into the hallway, still talking to the dispatcher. I have evidence of physical abuse. I have photographs. I need someone to come now. Ma'am, are you in immediate danger? Yes, I said, as David appeared in the doorway behind me. His face was a mask of rage, all pretense of caring stepfather finally abandoned. He's here now. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Can you get to a safe location? I ran toward the front entrance of the building, my backpack bouncing against my shoulders. Other tenants had started opening their doors, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Rodriguez from 1A looked out with concern, while Mr. Kim from 3C stepped into the hallway with his phone already in his hand. What's going on? Mrs. Rodriguez asked. Call the police, I gasped, still running. Please, just call the police. Behind me, I could hear David's voice, suddenly calm and controlled again. It's okay, everyone. Family dispute. My stepdaughter is having some mental health issues. We're handling it. But I was already outside, standing on the sidewalk in the fading afternoon light, my phone still connected to 911, my evidence safe in my pocket, and for the first time in 3 years, I was breathing free air. The sound of sirens began in the distance, growing closer. The real fight was just beginning. Jessica's black Honda pulled up to the curb with a screech of brakes that made everyone turn. She stepped out wearing a charcoal business suit and an expression that could cut glass. Even at 23, she carried herself with the authority of someone who'd spent years learning how the legal system worked and, more importantly, how it failed. Officers, she said, approaching the group with a briefcase in one hand and her phone in the other. I'm Jessica Chen, paralegal with the Riverside County District Attorney's Office. I understand there's been some confusion about Ms. Morgan's situation. David stepped forward with his practiced smile. Ms. Chen, thank you for coming. I know Catherine has been involving your family in her difficulties, and we appreciate your concern. However, as Catherine's legal guardians, we feel it's best if we handle this as a family matter. Jessica didn't return his smile. Mr. Harrison? According to my records, you became Catherine's stepfather 3 years ago when you married her mother. You have no legal adoption papers on file with the county. The lie landed like a bomb in the middle of David's carefully constructed narrative. I stared at him in shock. For months, he'd been telling people he'd adopted me, using it to establish his authority over my life and medical decisions. The paperwork is still being processed, David stammered, his composure cracking for the first time. The paperwork was never filed, Jessica replied calmly, consulting her phone. I had someone check the records before I drove over here. Catherine's legal guardian is her biological mother, Susan Morgan. Mr. Harrison has no legal standing to make medical decisions for Catherine without Ms. Morgan's explicit consent. Officer Martinez looked between David and Jessica with growing interest. Ms. Chen, Are you saying the documentation Mr. Harrison provided about his legal relationship to Catherine is incorrect? I'm saying it needs to be verified before any decisions are made about Catherine's medical care. Jessica opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I'm also saying that I have some concerns about the other documentation Mr. Harrison has provided. David's face was flushing red, but he kept his voice level. Officers, Miss Chen is clearly biased in Catherine's favor. She's not thinking objectively about what's best for a troubled teenager. Actually, Jessica said, I'm thinking very objectively. Which is why I stopped by Dr. Patterson's office on my way here. She pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to Officer Martinez. This is a statement from Dr. Patterson regarding Catherine's visit last month. According to his actual notes, he treated her for tension headaches likely caused by stress. He made no psychological assessments, no recommendations for mental health evaluation, and no notations about agitation or paranoid behavior. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched David's face cycle through several expressions before settling on controlled anger. Dr. Patterson is mistaken, he said finally. He clearly doesn't remember the details of the appointment. Doctors don't make mistakes about their official medical records, Jessica replied. Especially when those records are subpoenaed by law enforcement. Officer Thompson looked up sharply. Subpoenaed? I contacted my supervisor while driving here. Given the serious nature of the accusations being made on both sides, the DA's office is opening a preliminary investigation. Jessica's voice carried the weight of official authority now. We'll need to examine all documentation related to this case, including any medical records, school reports, and photographic evidence. David went very still. Photographic evidence? Catherine mentioned having photographs of injuries sustained during alleged abuse. We'll need to review those as part of our investigation. I felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. This was the moment I'd been both dreading and praying for. The moment when the evidence I'd been carrying would finally see daylight. The photographs don't exist, David said quickly. That's part of Catherine's delusion. She claims to have evidence that she can never produce. Well, Jessica said, looking directly at me, let's settle that question right now. Catherine, do you have photographs of injuries inflicted by Mr. Harrison? Every eye was on me. David's gaze felt like laser beams, promising consequences I couldn't even imagine. Mom was crying again, but quieter now, as if she was finally beginning to understand that her world was about to change forever. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the flash drive. They're on here, I said, handing it to Jessica. 12 photos from 2 nights ago. David took them himself during the punishment, then told me to delete them. But I saved them first. David made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a snarl. Officers, this is exactly what I've been trying to tell you. Catherine has become increasingly creative with her fabrications. She probably put together some fake images using photo editing software. Photo editing software? Jessica raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting theory. Fortunately, digital forensics can determine if images have been manipulated. We'll have the FBI's Cyber Crimes Unit examine these files. The FBI? Mom spoke for the first time since Jessica had arrived, her voice barely a whisper. Federal involvement becomes necessary when there's potential evidence tampering in abuse cases, Jessica explained gently. Don't worry, Ms. Morgan. We just want to establish the truth. Officer Martinez stepped forward. Ms. Chen, I think we need to take a step back here. This situation has escalated beyond a simple domestic dispute. You're absolutely right, Jessica agreed. Which is why I'm formally requesting that Catherine be placed in protective custody while we sort this out. Given the serious allegations and the questions about evidence tampering, she shouldn't remain in the household until the investigation is complete. David's mask finally slipped completely. You can't take her away from her family. We've done nothing wrong. This is harassment based on the lies of a mentally unstable teenager. Mr. Harrison, Officer Thompson said carefully, your story has changed several times since we arrived. First you said you were Catherine's adoptive father, now we find out that's not true. You provided medical documentation that appears to be falsified. And now there's photographic evidence that needs to be examined. The photos are fake. David's voice rose for the first time, drawing stares from the neighbors who were still watching from a distance. Anyone can create fake images on a computer nowadays. Jessica pulled out her phone and connected the flash drive to it using a small adapter. Let's take a preliminary look, shall we? She scrolled through the images, her expression growing darker with each photo. When she reached the end, she looked up at David with undisguised disgust. Mr. Harrison, these photographs show clear evidence of systematic physical abuse. Multiple linear marks consistent with belt strikes, bruising in various stages of healing. and what appears to be defensive wounds on Catherine's arms and hands. They're fabricated, David insisted, but his voice lacked conviction now. The metadata shows they were taken with a camera registered to this household, on the date Catherine specified, at the time she specified. Jessica's voice was clinical. Professional. The lighting and shadow patterns are consistent with the living room of your apartment. And the injuries show the kind of detail that would be impossible to fake without Hollywood-level special effects. Mom made a choking sound. David, what did you do to my daughter? For a moment, the mask fell away completely, and I saw the real David Harrison. Not the concerned stepfather, not the pillar of the community, but someone who enjoyed causing pain and had been caught in the act. Susan, don't let them turn you against me, he said, reaching for her. You know how much I love both of you. Everything I did was to help Catherine become a better person. Mom stepped away from him. Better person? David, these photos, oh. God, what have I been allowing to happen? Ms. Morgan, Officer Martinez said gently, we're going to need to take Mr. Harrison into custody while we investigate these allegations. On what charges? David demanded. You have some photographs that could have been taken anywhere, at any time, by anyone. That's not evidence of abuse. Jessica smiled coldly. Actually, Mr. Harrison, it's not just the photographs. While I was driving here, I made some other calls. To Catherine's school, to her previous teachers, to her pediatrician. I've been building a timeline of Catherine's injuries and behavioral changes over the past 3 years. She pulled out another folder, thicker than the first. Mrs. Anderson, Catherine's sophomore year English teacher, documented several occasions when Catherine appeared to be in physical discomfort, particularly when sitting. She noted that Catherine always wore long sleeves, even on hot days. Mr. Rodriguez, her chemistry teacher, filed a report with the school administration about suspicious bruising on Catherine's wrists. David's face was ash-gray now. Teachers see things that aren't there all the time. They're trained to be suspicious. Dr. Kim, Catherine's pediatrician, has records of 3 visits in the past year for injuries that didn't match the explanations provided by Ms. Morgan. Jessica continued relentlessly. A twisted ankle that showed signs of impact trauma rather than a simple fall. A shoulder injury that was inconsistent with the skiing accident story. And most recently, those tension headaches that coincided with increased stress markers. You've been planning this, David said, his voice hollow. This is a conspiracy. No, Mr. Harrison. This is what happens when people start paying attention. Jessica closed the folder with a snap. And we're just getting started. Officer Thompson stepped forward with handcuffs. David Harrison, you're under arrest for suspected child abuse and evidence tampering. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda rights echoed in the evening air, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years, relief so profound it made my knees weak. David was led to the police car in handcuffs, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him, but Mom was falling apart in a different way. How could I not have known, she whispered, staring at Jessica's phone where the photos were still displayed. How could I have been so blind? Jessica approached her gently. Ms. Morgan, abusers are very skilled at manipulation. They create situations where victims feel responsible for their own abuse, where family members doubt their own perceptions. This isn't your fault. It is my fault, Mom said, her voice breaking. She's my daughter. I was supposed to protect her, and instead I handed her over to a monster. I wanted to comfort her, but I also felt a lifetime of anger bubbling up. 3 years of being told I was difficult, that I needed discipline, that David's violence was love. 3 years of watching her choose him over me, again and again. Ms. Morgan, Officer Martinez said, we're going to need to conduct a full investigation. That means Catherine can't return to the apartment tonight. Do you have somewhere safe she can stay? Before Mom could answer, Jessica stepped forward. Catherine can stay with my family tonight. We have a guest room, and my mother is a registered nurse. She can document Catherine's current injuries for the official record. I looked at Jessica with gratitude that felt too big for words. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she said seriously. This is just the beginning. David will hire a lawyer, probably a good one. He'll claim the photos are fake, that you've been coached to lie, that this is all part of some elaborate scheme. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the past 3 years, about all the times I'd been told my reality wasn't real, that my pain didn't matter, that my voice didn't count. I'm prepared, I said. Jessica nodded approvingly. Good. Because we're going to need to build an airtight case. And that means uncovering everything, not just what David did to you, but his pattern of behavior with other families. Other families? Mom looked up sharply. Abusers like David don't start with one victim and stop, Jessica explained. There are likely others. Previous partners, their children, maybe even his own family members. We need to find them and document the pattern. Officer Thompson approached us after securing David in the patrol car. Miss Chen, the DA's office will be taking the lead on this case? Absolutely. And we'll be coordinating with Child Protective Services, the FBI's Cyber Crimes Unit, and potentially other jurisdictions depending on what we uncover about Mr. Harrison's background. As if summoned by her words, another car pulled up to the curb. A woman in her 40s stepped out, wearing a badge and carrying a tablet. I'm Sarah Williams from Child Protective Services, she announced. I understand we have a situation involving suspected child abuse? The next hour passed in a blur of official interviews, paperwork, and photographs. Sarah documented my injuries with clinical efficiency while Jessica sat beside me, taking notes and occasionally interjecting when the questions became too invasive. Mom waited in the living room with Officer Martinez, giving her own statement about the past 3 years. Through the bedroom door, I could hear her crying as she recounted incident after incident that she now recognized as warning signs she'd ignored. Catherine, Sarah said as she finished photographing the welts on my back, I need you to understand that what happens next won't be easy. David will claim you're lying. His lawyer will try to discredit you, to make you seem unstable or vindictive. Are you prepared for that? Everyone keeps asking me that, I said, pulling my shirt back down. But what choice do I have? If I don't fight this, he'll do it to someone else. Sarah nodded approvingly. That's exactly the right attitude. And you won't be fighting alone. Jessica has assembled quite a team in just a few hours. What do you mean? Jessica looked up from her notes. While the officers were taking statements, I made some calls. We have a pro bono attorney who specializes in abuse cases, a child psychologist who can evaluate the authenticity of your claims, and a private investigator who's already started looking into David's background. You did all that in one evening? Catherine, cases like this live or die in the first 48 hours. David is probably calling his lawyer right now, and that lawyer is going to try to discredit everything we've gathered. We need to move fast and build a case that's so solid it can't be shaken. Sarah packed up her equipment. I'm recommending that Catherine remain in protective placement until the investigation is complete. Ms. Morgan, you'll need to decide whether you're willing to support your daughter's claims or whether you're going to stand by your husband. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Through the bedroom door, I could see Mom sitting on the couch, her face in her hands. I choose my daughter, she said quietly. I should have chosen her 3 years ago. Jessica squeezed my hand. Then let's go make sure David Harrison never hurts another child again. As we prepared to leave the apartment, I took one last look around the place that had been my prison for 3 years. The living room where David had administered his discipline. The kitchen where Mom had made excuses for his behavior. The bedroom where I'd hidden my pain and planned my escape. Tomorrow, this would all be evidence in a criminal case. Tonight, it was just the place where a 17-year-old girl had learned the difference between love and control, between discipline and abuse, between surviving and living. I picked up my backpack and followed Jessica toward the door, leaving behind the girl who had believed she deserved everything that had happened to her. The woman walking out was someone different entirely, someone who was ready to fight. The evening air felt different as we walked toward Jessica's car. Not because anything had fundamentally changed in the world, but because I finally understood that the prison I'd been living in had always had a door. I just needed someone to show me where the key was hidden, and now, with Jessica's team forming around me and evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away, I finally had the tools to not just escape, but to make sure the prison was torn down completely. David's arrest was just the beginning. The real work of justice was about to start, but for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't facing it alone. 3 days after David's arrest, I woke up in Maya's guest bedroom to the sound of my phone buzzing with an unknown number. The Chen family had taken me in without question, transforming their spare room into a safe haven with clean sheets, a desk for homework, and Mrs. Chen's homemade cookies appearing at regular intervals. Catherine Morgan? The voice on the phone was professional, clipped. Yes. This is Detective Ray Kowalski with the Riverside Police. I need you to come to the station this morning. We have some developments in your case. My stomach clenched. What kind of developments? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you be here by 10 a.m.? I looked at the clock. It was already 8:30, and Maya had left early for a student government meeting. Can someone come with me? Ms. Chen is already here, along with your attorney. They're waiting for you. The drive to the police station felt like traveling through a nightmare. Mrs. Chen had insisted on driving me, her usual cheerful chatter replaced by worried silence. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of interviews, medical examinations, and legal consultations, but there'd been an underlying sense of progress, of justice moving forward. Now, something had changed. Detective Kowalski was a heavy-set man in his 50s with tired eyes and coffee stains on his shirt. He led me to a conference room where Jessica sat beside a woman I didn't recognize, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that screamed serious lawyer. "Catherine, this is Margaret Reeves," Jessica said, standing as I entered. "She's the attorney I mentioned, specializing in abuse cases." Margaret shook my hand with a firm grip. "Catherine, I need to be direct with you. We have some significant challenges ahead." Detective Kowalski settled into his chair with a heavy sigh. "Ms. Morgan, David Harrison made bail yesterday afternoon." The words hit me like ice water. "Bail?" "But Jessica said," "I said we had a strong case," Jessica interrupted gently. "But judges have to consider flight risk and public safety." David's lawyer argued successfully that he's not a danger to the community and has strong ties to the area. Margaret opened a thick folder. "His attorney is Marcus Webb, one of the best defense lawyers in the state. He's already filed several motions challenging the evidence." "What kind of challenges?" My voice sounded small in the sterile conference room. Detective Kowalski leaned forward. "Webb is claiming the photographs were staged, that you and Ms. Chen conspired to create false evidence. He's hired a digital forensics expert who says the images show signs of manipulation." "That's impossible. David took those pictures himself." Webb's expert disagrees. He claims the lighting is inconsistent, that the angles suggest artificial staging, and that the metadata could have been altered. Margaret's voice was matter-of-fact, but I could see concern in her eyes. Jessica pulled out her own tablet. "We had the FBI's cyber crimes unit examine the same images. Their analysis contradicts Webb's expert completely. But now we have two conflicting forensics reports." "Which means?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand. "Which means a jury will have to decide which expert to believe," Margaret explained. "And Webb is very good at creating reasonable doubt." Detective Kowalski cleared his throat. "There's more. Webb has filed a motion claiming that Ms. Chen's investigation was improper, that she overstepped her authority as a paralegal and tainted potential evidence." "Jessica was helping me," I protested. "She was the only one who listened." "I know that, and you know that," Margaret said. "But Webb is arguing that Jessica coached you, helped you fabricate evidence, and manipulated other witnesses. He's painting this as an elaborate scheme." The room felt like it was closing in around me. "So what does this mean? Is David going to get away with everything?" "Not if we can help it," Jessica said firmly. "But we need to be prepared for a much harder fight than we anticipated." Margaret spread several documents across the table. "Webb has also hired a private investigator who's been digging into your background, Catherine. They're looking for anything they can use to discredit you." "What could they possibly find? I'm 17 years old." "That's exactly what worries me," Margaret replied. "They're focusing on your academic performance, your social relationships, any incidents of defiance or anger at home. They're building a profile of a troubled teenager who fabricated abuse allegations." Detective Kowalski opened his own folder. "We've also discovered that David has resources we didn't know about. Significant financial resources." "What do you mean?" "Hidden accounts. Offshore investments. David Harrison is much wealthier than he appeared. That construction job was apparently a cover for some very successful business ventures." Jessica's expression darkened. "Which explains how he can afford Marcus Webb. Top-tier criminal defense doesn't come cheap." "But it also raises questions," Margaret added. "We're investigating where that money came from. Some of the financial patterns suggest he might have been running cons on other families." A knock at the conference room door interrupted us. A young police officer entered, looking nervous. "Detective Kowalski? David Harrison is here with his lawyer. They're requesting to make a statement." Margaret and Jessica exchanged glances. "That's highly unusual," Margaret said. "Most defense attorneys advise their clients to stay silent." "Webb's not most attorneys," Detective Kowalski replied grimly. "He's probably planning something." 20 minutes later, we were seated in the station's main conference room, watching David Harrison walk in, flanked by Marcus Webb and a young associate. David looked different. Gone was the working-class construction worker image. He wore an expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled, every inch the successful businessman. He'd removed his mask completely. Marcus Webb was exactly what I'd expected from Jessica's description, silver-haired, supremely confident, with a kind of smile that suggested he'd never lost a case he cared about winning. "Detective Kowalski," Webb began without preamble, "my client would like to set the record straight about these unfortunate allegations." "Mr. Harrison is under no obligation to make a statement," Margaret interjected. "Indeed not," Webb agreed smoothly. But my client is eager to clear up what appears to be a serious misunderstanding. David leaned forward, his eyes finding mine across the table. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the artificial warmth I'd grown accustomed to over 3 years. This was the real David Harrison. Detective, I want you to understand something about Catherine Morgan. She's been a troubled child since the day I married her mother. Defiant, manipulative, prone to elaborate fantasies when she doesn't get her way. Mr. Harrison, Margaret warned, anything you say can be used against you. Webb raised a hand. My client is well aware of his rights. Mr. Harrison, please continue. Catherine has always resented my presence in her family. She's made it clear from the beginning that she didn't want a stepfather, especially one who expected her to follow rules and show respect. David's voice was calm, reasonable. Over the past 3 years, her behavior has escalated dramatically. He reached into a briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Detective, I have documentation of Catherine's behavioral issues dating back to my marriage to her mother. School reports, incidents of violence, evidence of her increasingly unstable mental state. Jessica leaned over to whisper in Margaret's ear, but I could read her lips. We need to see those documents. For example, David continued, opening the folder, last month Catherine attacked her stepsister Emily during a family dinner. Emily had to receive medical treatment for scratches on her face. Emily? I stared at him in confusion. What are you talking about? I don't have a stepsister named Emily. Webb smiled coldly. Emily Harrison, my client's daughter from his previous marriage. She's been living with the family for the past 6 months. The room started spinning. That's not true. David doesn't have a daughter. There's no Emily. David's expression shifted into practiced concern. Detective, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Catherine has begun denying the existence of family members, rewriting history to fit her delusions. Margaret stood up abruptly. This interview is over. Detective Kowalski, my client will not be responding to any more questions until we've had time to review these alleged documents. But Webb wasn't finished. There's one more thing, Detective. My client has been in contact with Catherine's biological father's family. They've provided some very interesting information about hereditary mental illness. My father is dead, I said, my voice rising. He died in a car accident when I was 12. Actually, Webb said, consulting his notes, your father, Michael Morgan, is alive and well, living in Portland, Oregon. He's been trying to contact you for years, but your mother has been preventing it on the advice of doctors who treated him for severe bipolar disorder and paranoid delusions. The room exploded into chaos. Margaret was shouting objections, Jessica was frantically taking notes, and Detective Kowalski was trying to restore order. But all I could hear was the roaring in my ears as my entire understanding of my life crumbled around me. You're lying, I whispered, but even as I said it, doubt was creeping in. Mom had always been vague about Dad's death, changing the subject whenever I asked for details. And there were no photos of the accident scene, no grave I'd ever visited, no death certificate I'd ever seen. Catherine, Margaret said urgently, don't listen to anything they're saying. This is all part of their strategy to confuse you, to make you doubt yourself. But David wasn't done. Detective, I have medical records showing that Catherine's father was hospitalized multiple times for violent psychotic episodes. The doctors said his condition was hereditary, that Catherine had a 70% chance of developing similar symptoms by her late teens. He pulled out another document. This is from Dr. Sarah Martinez, a psychiatrist who's been monitoring Catherine's mental health since I married her mother. Dr. Martinez has documented Catherine's increasing paranoia, her violent outbursts, and her elaborate fabrication of abuse scenarios. I've never seen a psychiatrist, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. So many things about my life suddenly seemed uncertain. The doctor visits Mom had taken me to, the appointments I'd assumed were for routine checkups. The medications she'd started giving me for anxiety 6 months ago. Jessica grabbed my hand under the table. Catherine, don't let them do this to you. This is classic gaslighting. They're trying to make you question your own reality. Webb smiled triumphantly. Miss Chen, I understand you've developed quite an attachment to Catherine during your brief acquaintance. But perhaps you should consider that you've been manipulated by someone suffering from the same hereditary mental illness that destroyed her father's life. Margaret was gathering papers frantically. Detective Kowalski, this entire presentation is prejudicial and improper. We're leaving immediately. But as we stood to go, David played his final card. Catherine, he said quietly, Emily wants to see you. She's been worried sick since you disappeared. She's waiting outside if you'd like to speak with her. Against every warning from Margaret and Jessica, I found myself walking toward the conference room door. Because part of me needed to know if Emily was real, if there truly was another person whose existence I'd somehow forgotten or denied. In the hallway outside the conference room stood a girl about my age with long brown hair and frightened eyes. She was real, solid, undeniably present. "Catherine," she said tentatively. "It's me, Emily. Are you okay? Dad said you've been having episodes again." I stared at her, searching my memory for any trace of this person who was supposed to be my stepsister. But there was nothing. No shared meals, no conversations, no presence in my life whatsoever. "I don't know you," I whispered. Emily's face crumpled. "Catherine, please don't do this. I know you're angry about the medication changes, but Dr. Martinez said this might happen. She said you might start forgetting things, denying relationships." Behind me, I heard Margaret's urgent voice, "Catherine, come back here now. This is part of their manipulation." But I was drowning in doubt. Everything I thought I knew about my life was being systematically dismantled. My father wasn't dead but mentally ill. I had a stepsister I couldn't remember. I'd been seeing a psychiatrist I had no memory of visiting. Was I crazy? Had I imagined the abuse? Had I fabricated evidence of violence that never occurred? Emily reached out tentatively. "Catherine, you gave me this bracelet for my birthday last month. You said sisters should stick together no matter what." She held up her wrist, showing a simple silver bracelet that looked exactly like one I'd lost several weeks ago. A bracelet I'd treasured because it had been a gift from my biological father. The sight of it sent me into a full panic attack. If Emily had my bracelet, if she had memories of interactions I couldn't recall, then what did that say about my grip on reality? "I can't breathe," I gasped, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor. "I can't remember. Why can't I remember?" Jessica was beside me in seconds, but her voice sounded far away. "Catherine, listen to me. This is what they want. They want you to doubt yourself, to question your memories. The abuse happened. The photos are real. Don't let them take that away from you." But through my panic, I could hear David's voice from the conference room, speaking to Detective Kowalski. "This is exactly what happened to her father. The complete break from reality, the inability to distinguish between delusion and fact. We've been trying to get her help, but she's been resistant to treatment." Margaret was pulling me to my feet, Jessica was calling for medical assistance, and Emily was crying as she watched what appeared to be her sister having a complete mental breakdown. And in that moment, surrounded by chaos and confusion and the systematic destruction of everything I thought I knew about myself, I finally understood David's true genius. He hadn't just been physically abusing me for 3 years. He'd been carefully, methodically preparing for this moment when I would finally fight back. He'd planted false memories, hidden real ones, created documentation of mental illness, and built an entire alternate reality where I was the unreliable narrator of my own life. He'd turned my own mind into a weapon against me. As the paramedics arrived and someone pressed an oxygen mask over my face, I realized that David hadn't just been preparing to defend against my accusations. He'd been preparing to destroy me completely, and the most terrifying part was that it was working. In the space of 1 hour, I'd gone from being a credible witness with solid evidence to being a mentally ill teenager having a psychotic break in a police station. Everything we'd built was crumbling. And I was drowning in the wreckage of my own shattered reality. The last thing I heard before the sedative took effect was Webb's voice, calm and professional. "Detective, I think it's clear that my client is the victim here. This young woman needs psychiatric help, not a criminal trial." And as consciousness faded, I couldn't help wondering if he was right. I woke up in a hospital bed with restraints on my wrists and the taste of sedatives thick in my mouth. The psychiatric ward at Riverside General was nothing like the hospitals I'd seen in movies, just sterile white walls, the constant hum of fluorescent lights, and the distant sound of someone crying in another room. A nurse with kind eyes and tired smile checked my vitals. "How are you feeling, Catherine?" "Confused," I said honestly. "How long have I been here?" 3 days. "You had what the doctors are calling a severe dissociative episode. Do you remember what happened at the police station?" Fragments came flooding back. David in his expensive suit. Emily with my bracelet. The claims about my father being alive, about psychiatrists I couldn't remember seeing. The complete collapse of everything I thought I knew about my life. "I remember," I whispered. "Your friend Jessica has been calling every day. She's not allowed to visit during your evaluation period, but she wanted you to know she hasn't given up on you." The nurse left, and I stared at the ceiling trying to piece together what was real and what wasn't. Had I really forgotten a stepsister? Was my father alive in Portland? Had I been seeing a psychiatrist for months without remembering? The doubt felt like poison in my veins. Doctor Amanda Foster arrived an hour later, a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every form of teenage crisis imaginable. She settled into the plastic chair beside my bed with a thick folder. Catherine, I'm Dr. Foster. I've been reviewing your case, and I need to ask you some direct questions. Am I crazy? The words came out before I could stop them. That's not a term I use, Dr. Foster replied. But I am concerned about some inconsistencies in your medical history. According to the records provided by your family, you've been under psychiatric care for 6 months. But you have no memory of these appointments? None. I would remember seeing a psychiatrist. Memory gaps can be a symptom of several conditions, including trauma-induced dissociation. She opened her folder. However, I've been unable to contact Dr. Sarah Martinez, the psychiatrist who supposedly treated you. Her medical license was suspended 3 years ago for falsifying patient records. The fog in my mind began to clear. She's not real. She's real, but she hasn't been practicing medicine legally. Which raises questions about who's been providing these detailed psychiatric reports about your condition. Dr. Foster pulled out several documents. Catherine, I've also been investigating the medication your mother gave you for anxiety. The prescription bottles were labeled with Dr. Martinez's name, but the pills inside were actually a mild antipsychotic that can cause memory issues and confusion when given to someone who doesn't need them. Someone was drugging me. It appears that way. Small doses, not enough to cause serious harm, but enough to create the symptoms of mental instability that are documented in these reports. She showed me another paper. This is particularly interesting. According to your psychiatric file, you've been having violent episodes and memory lapses for months. But your actual school records show steady academic performance until 3 days ago. Your teachers describe you as quiet, studious, occasionally distracted, but never violent or unstable. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. David created fake medical records to make me look crazy. That's my preliminary assessment. But Catherine, I need you to understand something. Even if these records are fabricated, your memory gaps about Emily and your father are real. Something has happened to your memory, and we need to figure out what. She pulled out a photograph that made my breath catch. It showed me and Emily together at what looked like a family dinner, both of us smiling at the camera. I was wearing the silver bracelet that Emily now had. This was allegedly taken 2 months ago. Do you remember this moment? I studied the photo desperately, searching for any trace of recognition. But it was like looking at a stranger wearing my face. I don't remember. But how is that possible? How can I forget an entire person? There are several possibilities. Trauma-induced memory suppression, where your mind blocks out painful experiences. Drug-induced amnesia from the medication you were given. Or, she hesitated. Or what? Or, the photos and documents could be fabricated. With today's technology, it's possible to create very convincing false images and memories. A knock at the door interrupted us. Jessica entered, looking like she hadn't slept in days, followed by a man I didn't recognize, tall, distinguished, with the kind of presence that suggested authority. Dr. Foster, Jessica said, this is FBI agent Marcus Cole from the Cyber Crimes Division. He has some information about the evidence in Catherine's case. Agent Cole settled into another chair, opening a laptop. Ms. Morgan, my team has been conducting a comprehensive analysis of all digital evidence related to your case. We've made some remarkable discoveries. He turned the laptop screen toward me. First, the photographs you took of your injuries. Our analysis confirms they are completely authentic, unaltered, and taken with the camera registered to your household on the dates specified. Relief flooded through me. So the defense expert was wrong? The defense expert was lying, Agent Cole said bluntly. Marcus Webb hired someone who would say whatever he paid them to say. Our analysis is thorough, scientific, and will stand up in court. He clicked to another screen. But more importantly, we've discovered an extensive network of fabricated documents and digital manipulation centered around David Harrison. The screen filled with a complex flowchart showing connections between fake medical practices, false identities, and financial accounts. David Harrison has been running sophisticated cons for over a decade. He targets single mothers with teenage daughters, marries them, and systematically embezzles their assets while psychologically abusing their children. Other families? I whispered. At least 6 that we've identified so far. Always the same pattern. He establishes himself as a concerned stepfather, gradually isolates the family, then escalates to abuse while building documentation to discredit his victims if they try to speak out. Jessica leaned forward. Agent Cole, tell her about Emily. Agent Cole's expression darkened. Emily Harrison is David's daughter, but she's also one of his victims. She's been trained since childhood to participate in his cons. She believes her role is to help her father save troubled families, but in reality, she's been systematically abused and manipulated into becoming his accomplice. So she's real, but the memories of living together aren't? The photos of you together were created using sophisticated digital manipulation software. Emily was photographed separately, then inserted into images of you. Your bracelet was likely stolen during one of her visits to your home, visits you wouldn't remember because you were given higher doses of the memory-affecting medication. Dr. Foster made notes in her folder. This explains the memory gaps. Catherine, you weren't developing mental illness. You were being systematically poisoned and gaslighted by someone who spent years perfecting these techniques. Agent Cole. Click to another screen. There's more. We traced the fake psychiatric reports to a larger network of fraudulent medical practices. David has been paying corrupt doctors and fake practitioners to create false diagnoses for multiple victims over the years. What happened to them? The other families? Some of the mothers never realized what was happening to their daughters. Others tried to report abuse but were discredited by the false medical evidence David had planted. 2 families lost custody of their children when David convinced courts the mothers were mentally unstable. The magnitude of David's operation was staggering. He wasn't just an abuser, he was a predator who'd industrialized the process of destroying families. But why go to all this trouble? I asked. Why not just disappear when things got difficult? Jessica pulled out her own folder. Because David doesn't just want money. He enjoys the psychological control. Our investigation has revealed that he's been documenting his abuse of multiple victims, creating a library of pain that he uses for his own entertainment. Agent Cole nodded grimly. We found encrypted files on his computers containing videos and photographs from all his previous families. He's been collecting trophies of his victims' suffering for years. So all the other girls are alive, and we're working to connect them with support services. But Catherine, you're the first victim who managed to gather evidence and fight back successfully. You're the key to bringing down his entire operation. Dr. Foster closed her folder. Catherine, I can say with complete medical certainty that you are not mentally ill. You were the victim of systematic psychological torture designed to make you question your own sanity. The fact that you survived it with your core sense of self intact is remarkable. A new voice spoke from the doorway. It's also why you're so dangerous to him. We turned to see Margaret Reeves entering with a woman I recognized from news reports, District Attorney Linda Vasquez, known for her prosecution of complex white-collar crimes. Ms. Morgan, D.A. Vasquez said, I want to personally apologize for what you've endured. The system failed you, but we're going to make sure it doesn't fail any of David's other victims. She sat down, her expression serious. We're building a federal case against David Harrison that will include charges ranging from child abuse to fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and racketeering. With your testimony and the evidence we've gathered, we can put him away for life. What about Emily? I asked. She's a victim too. Emily is being evaluated by specialists who work with children who've been forced to participate in criminal activities, Agent Cole explained. She's beginning to understand that what her father told her about helping families was actually about destroying them. Margaret leaned forward. Catherine, there's something else. We've located your biological father in Portland. He's very much alive and has been trying to contact you for years. Your mother was blocking his calls on David's advice. The revelation should have been shocking, but after everything else, it felt almost predictable. David told her my father was dangerous? David convinced her that your father was mentally ill and violent, that contact with him would trigger hereditary mental illness in you. It was all lies designed to cut you off from anyone who might have protected you. D.A. Vasquez pulled out her phone. Your father is on his way here. He wanted to catch the first flight when we contacted him yesterday. He's been living with the belief that you wanted nothing to do with him. The hospital room fell silent as the full scope of David's manipulation became clear. He hadn't just abused me physically, he'd systematically dismantled my entire support network, isolated me from anyone who might have helped, and turned my own mind against me, but he'd made one critical mistake: he'd underestimated my ability to document his abuse, and he'd underestimated the determination of people like Jessica, Margaret, and Agent Cole to seek justice. When does the real trial start? I asked. Next month, D.A. Vasquez replied. David's high-powered lawyer is going to try every trick in the book to discredit you and the evidence. But this time, we'll be ready for him. Agent Cole smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Catherine, Marcus Webb built his reputation on cases where he could create reasonable doubt about the evidence. But he's never faced a case where the evidence is this overwhelming and the pattern of behavior is this well documented. Plus, Jessica added, we have something he doesn't expect. What's that? Emily has agreed to testify for the prosecution. She's ready to tell the truth about her father's operation and her forced participation in it. Webb's entire defense strategy is based on portraying you as an unstable teenager manipulated by Emily. That falls apart when Emily herself testifies about the manipulation. Margaret gathered her papers. Catherine, I want you to understand that. The next few weeks won't be easy. David will try every possible way to discredit you, to make you doubt yourself again. Are you prepared for that? I thought about everything I'd learned in the past hour. About the fake medical records, the drugged medication, the fabricated photographs. About David's network of victims and Emily's forced participation in his crimes. I'm prepared, I said. But not just for me. For all the other girls he hurt, and for the ones he might hurt if we don't stop him. Dr. Foster made a final note in her file. Catherine will be discharged tomorrow morning. Medically, she's completely healthy. Psychologically, she's one of the strongest young women I've ever treated. As they prepared to leave, Agent Cole paused at the door. Catherine, there's one more thing. When we arrested David's network, we recovered something that belonged to you. He handed me a small jewelry box. Inside was the silver bracelet I'd thought was lost forever, the real one my father had given me years ago. Emily was forced to give it back when she agreed to cooperate. She wanted you to know that she never wanted to take it in the first place. I fastened the bracelet around my wrist, feeling like I was reclaiming a piece of myself that had been stolen. What happens to David now? Now, D.A. Vasquez said with satisfaction, we show him what real justice looks like. And we make sure he never has the opportunity to hurt another family again. As they left, I sat in the hospital bed holding my father's bracelet and feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, hope mixed with determination. David Harrison had built his life around controlling and destroying others. But he'd never faced victims who refused to stay silent, investigators who wouldn't be fooled by his manipulation, and a justice system determined to stop him. His reign of terror was about to end, and this time, I was going to be there to watch it happen. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.